2020, after George Floyd was murdered, and I was having numerous conversations with members of the Out the Box community about safety as a Black person in the workplace. And a lot of people were struggling with how to navigate being at work as a Black person due to the obvious things which you know about, such as microaggressions, stereotypes, lack of equal opportunities, you name it. So I said that I would create a Zoom drop-in just so we could all come to a space where we felt safe in that moment, because I'm not sure about you, at the height of everything, I just felt so low. I didn't want to talk to anyone at work, and I just wanted to be among my people to talk about what we can do to tackle things in a progressive and a productive way. So I enlisted the help of Ivy to help facilitate that first session. And how many people showed up on Zoom?
Like 100.
About 100 people.
About 100.
And it was electric. You know, I think what was supposed to be like a sad time, we felt just at home with each other, we laughed, we joked. And then it's just continued on from there just because the demand has been so high. I was saying to Ivy, we've kind of started delving into like deep territory because we've really started to kind of go into the system of things and the systemic issues. And we're looking at different industries and sectors. So for this one, we are looking at the education sector, which I feel is kind of the basis of everything that we are as people, because those are the places where we get our first experiences of life, where we learn things, where we learn how to communicate with people and share with people and live life with people. And it's not the best experience for Black children. And then, of course, you have Black teachers that have their struggles, especially when it comes to the curriculum and all sorts of different things. So we enlisted Lynette and Liz, who are incredible people doing great things in the space. And we really wanted to just come and begin the discussion here for us to then take away the learnings and start applying it to just deeper work that we're doing with Black at Work. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I hope that you take something away from this evening that you can go and apply it into your workplaces and your places of study. And yeah, I'm going to go and float off around now. Yeah. And I'll let Ivy.
I'll do a little intro. Thank you, Anne. Hi everyone, I'm your host, and I've been hosting Black at Work, as Ren said, since it started. And it's just been so great, like having conversations, obviously it being born from not a good place, because obviously we're talking about police brutality and racism. It's all very heavy subjects. But today I'm so excited because we're going to be talking to Liz and Lynette, who I'm introing to come up like right now. We're going to talk about education and Blackness and how that kind of operates as Black people in education and within the system. They're two fantastic, fantastic people, amazing women. They've done so much, and I'm just so excited to have them introduce themselves. So they'll start with an introduction, and then we should have a short little break, and then we'll kick off the questions, and then we'll have a Q&A. So that's kind of how it's going to run. So without further ado, Liz and Lynette, could you please come to the stage? I'll tell you a little backstory. So Lynette's my cousin, so everyone knows. And she dragged me into doing my master's because I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for her. She's like been like, she's so academic and just so smart. So I'm not gonna get emotional, but it's just really nice to have her here. And then Liz, I was Instagram stalking her before I knew her. Like I was like, the Black nursery manager, who is that? I need to know who she is. So to be able to like now sit next to her, I just think it's like, is it such a full circle moment to have them here? So I'm really excited about them introducing themselves and then kicking off the talk. So I think it would be Liz first, right?
Okay, let's go.
Let's go for it.
I was going to try and warm myself up. Evening, everybody. It's really nice to be here. You will notice by my accent that I hopped on the motorway about 4 hours ago to get here, Birmingham 0121 forever. And I, as Ivy had said, I am the Black Nursery Manager on social media. I'm a former early years settings manager and had done that for 16 years up until 2020. I decided in 2020 that I wanted to take some of the things that I was doing in the nursery into a training and consultancy space. So I set up my own training and consultancy business called the Black Nursery Manager to primarily work with settings that have Black and brown children and think about what information we are giving children during their earliest years. So that work led me to work in spaces such as Wales, interestingly, Weston-super-Mare, very white spaces, but spaces really that needed to have these conversations when housing and looking after Black children. So fast forward kind of to where we are now, the work is taking me internationally. So I'm doing a bit of work at the International School of Geneva, which is right next to the UN, for people who don't know. And of course, when we're having conversations internationally and we're thinking about housing Black children and we're looking at the Black diaspora, we're not just looking really narrowly at Black Caribbean experiences, we're looking across the whole spectrum. And so some of the things that I wanted to really bring to this space this evening was how we think about early childhood for Black children, what it means to be a Black child in 2022, out of a pandemic and into a space where we're still dealing with institutional, structural, systemic racism, and also how we're building positive senses of self for Black children under 5. This work is very important to me. It is necessary work that I want everybody to get involved in. I think Black childhood should be full of joy, and at the moment it is not. And I want to really think about how we're changing that from the inside out. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell-ish.
Thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, like through your whole career and everything, what one key lesson would you give through your career, through your experiences? What's the one thing that you've learned? I know it's hard to kind of put it down to one thing.
To really, and it sounds really cliche, but to really follow your passion. What are you passionate about? Because there's no point doing something because you're going to get paid to do it. You have to be really driven by a passion, and that passion has to be at the core of you and everything that you do. So although now my work is based in training and consultancy in early years, I'm a secondary school teacher by qualification, and it was always the passion that drove me to do that. So passion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Give it up for Liz. And now Lynette.
I'm not yet at the stage of being as succinct as Liz is, so I'm going to kind of start from the beginning, so like the kind of why I do this. So I grew up on an estate which was in southeast London, so in a borough called Lewisham, in an area called Catford, and a lot of our community was filled with migrants, with single parents, with people who were living in poverty, and they were really entrepreneurial, like the most entrepreneurial people I've to this day ever met, but they didn't have the resources and the support to kind of build their ideas out and kind of form businesses, sustainable businesses out of them. So I was always around entrepreneurship, but I was never around it in the sense of seeing successful entrepreneurship. And the kind of next kind of example I've had of entrepreneurship was when I was in school. So in GCSE, you get to choose your subjects at year 9, I think it is. And I know a lot of my guy friends chose to study business. And I remember there was a lesson where they learned about profit making, and they were so inspired and excited. And prior to that, they had not been kind of interested in school at all. But that lesson where they learned about profit making, it was really transformative for them. Like the next day they went to our local supermarket, like we were here, the Sainsbury's was here. So they went to the Sainsbury's, they bought donuts, they bought sweets, they bought drinks, and they brought them into school and they sold them to us in the lunch break. They had made a whole lunch, a price list, they had deals for us. And us as pupils who didn't have a tuck shop, we were really kind of happy. We was like, yeah, we get donuts, yeah, we get sweets. But the school adultified them from the jump, and they was like, you've kind of bought kind of items from Sainsbury's and you're selling them to your students, and we haven't given you the green light for that, so we're going to exclude you. And exclusion is such a kind of catalyst for a lot of things to go wrong in your life thereafter, because other schools aren't going to want to take you in, and then that's going to affect your GCSEs, your A-levels, and then if you're trying to get into university, if you haven't got the GCSEs and the A-levels, it's really difficult to get into university, so then you kind of try and find other forms of income which are not going to be suitable according to the law. So they kind of went down those routes because there were people outside of school who were in gangs who were like, I see that potential and I'm going to teach you how to kind of sell drugs or do fraud. Whereas the school was like, I see that potential or I don't see that potential, so we're going to exclude you instead. So they kind of pushed them into the arms of these people who were saying, do this thing for us and we'll teach you how to make money. And those decisions that they made at like 14, 15, they ended up impacting them to this day. So I'm 30 now, and to this day, the choices that they made then, although they've learned from them, they haven't really had the opportunity to kind of change and pursue opportunities, which they'll be suitable for because they've had over a decade's worth of experience of business. So I thought about those young people when I became a lecturer. So I'd gone to uni, I went into a career in financial inclusion. So financial inclusion is about working with people in poverty, but almost as a money advisor. So a lot of wealthy people have wealth managers, but I was more so a wealth manager for people who don't have a lot of money because we don't have that kind of support and advisory support. So I was a financial inclusion advisor, and I learned through my role that people who don't have money, they don't lack financial management skills. What they lack is the resources, the support, and on top of that, they go through things like domestic violence, like emotional abuse from partners. They go through things like having to choose between electricity and buying food because their benefits are often sanctioned. Like if anyone in this room has kind of received welfare benefits before, then you know that they sanction them for anything because they don't want to pay you, they don't want to support you. So a lot of people that I worked with were 18 to 35 years old. So at that age, you haven't had a lot of family support and you are receiving £70 a week to live on in London, which is very, very difficult. So on top of that being difficult, you also then get sanctioned. So there's times when you don't have that money. So I learned that the work that I was doing was not effective. As much as I was trying to support them, the approach that my organisation was asking me to take was not effective, was not supporting them. And instead, it was making them feel more guilty about what they weren't able to do in terms of meeting their rent and paying their rent on time because they had to, again, choose between food and electricity and rent. So I went back to uni, I studied social business and microfinance because I thought there's got to be a way, there's got to be another way to kind of help people figure out how to expand their resources from an earlier stage so that when they get into these circumstances, they have more options available to them. So did my master's and I got a scholarship for that, which enabled me to spend my time solely on my master's because from my undergrad, I hadn't had any kind of financial support. I'd had the tuition fees, but I still had to work 2 jobs to be able to kind of survive through university. And because of that, and I also had a chronic illness that was undiagnosed at the time. So a lot of the medics in Birmingham, although I love Birmingham.
I can see where this is going.
The Birmingham Hospital, they were shit. Like, they were sorry guys, but they were awful to me. They were awful to me, and I remember like having like an instance where like I was really ill and like I kind of collapsed in the train station, and my mum had to drive from London to drive me back to South London, and luckily there was a black woman on duty who got me the appropriate support because throughout university I kept kind of having instances where I had to go to hospital, but nobody ever kind of took it seriously. One person called it chicken poisoning. I mean, food poisoning. They asked me what I ate that evening, and I was like, oh yeah, I had chicken. And they was like, yeah, it must have been food poisoning. And then the second time I went there was like, it must have been an infection, but nobody ever scanned me. But when I went to South London, luckily because I had a black woman, she was like, okay, let's do the tests, let's do the scans, let's figure out what's wrong with you. And because of that, it turned out that I had an issue which caused me to need an emergency surgery, which I wouldn't have had if I didn't come back to London. So had that emergency surgery and was able to kind of go back to uni and did my dissertation literally in a week. And but to be fair, doing it in a week was because I had suffered with imposter syndrome throughout the whole university experience. Like my whole course, I did town planning and social policy at University of Birmingham, and my whole course was white Jews, like specifically white Jews, not just white, but white Jews, and from Golders Green. Like it was very specific. Everyone knew each other, everyone knew kind of the community and the family. So being the outsider, I never wanted to say that I needed support or I was going through things. So went back to uni, had a diet of like Red Bull and Pro Plus. Is it called Pro Plus? I think it's called Pro Plus. Yeah, so I had those kind of pills and kind of I was like, I'm not going to be the one black person and then also be the person that doesn't submit my dissertation on time or who needs mitigating circumstances, despite knowing that I had just had an emergency operation. So did that, graduated, and the dissertation did really well, but then because I'd already been suffering and not asking for help while I was suffering, the grades that I got prior to that point had caused me kind of graduate with a lesser degree than I know that I could have got. So when I went on to the masters this time round, I was able to just focus on the degree, like my health was a bit better, and I didn't have to work 2 jobs because of the scholarship, and because of that, I graduated with a distinction. I had like 2 prizes, so one for a UN writing competition, one for best dissertation in the university. So from that, and thinking about my experiences in primary and secondary school when I was considered a gifted and talented, I learned that if you are given the resources in terms of personal attention or financial resources, you can focus solely on that one thing in terms of your education that actually affects your performance. So I was like, it's not fair for people that I grew up with, like those friends of mine who got excluded because they were inspired by GCSE business. It's not fair for them to not have that personal support to kind of channel their kind of interests into something that will help them perform better in school and outside of school. So I went on to become a lecturer, and I thought, okay, what I'm teaching is business, and what I'm learning is that business is not that difficult, it's not rocket science. So what if I went back to my community and taught them the things that I'm now teaching these university students, and the things that I know that they might be passionate about because my friends were passionate about them during GCSE business. Because these are transferable skills, things like financial management, things like personal branding, things like pitching. These are things that in 2022 you're going to have to know regardless of what field you're in. So I thought, let me teach them these transferable skills, and then whatever they decide to go into, we've kind of provided them with that support, but then we've also provided them with a community of role models who can support them when they're going through those issues and who they feel like I can talk to. Because when I was going through those issues in uni, I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody. So did that, went to uni, and then set up an organisation called Attainment where they could come and talk to people who look like them, talk to people who are thriving across different fields. Like the role models we have in our community are doing everything. They're in the accountancy fields. We have people in aerospace, we have people in oil and gas, and then we have people in the creative fields like arts and theatre. So whatever young people want to do, there's somebody that we can match them with, who is doing the things that they want to do and who is going through the experiences that they're likely to have in education and in employment. So they can teach them the lessons that I've now learned, but from an earlier stage, so they know how to navigate these fields a bit better, and they know how to navigate uni a bit better. So that's why Attainment was born, and that's a lot of the work that we do. It's really just about providing young people with that social capital so that whatever their dreams are, they know that they can have the support of people who will have the same lived experiences as them, as opposed to our typical education experiences where we're being taught by people who don't necessarily have our lived experiences. Such a long intro.
No, thank you. I think it's good because you kind of walked us from the beginning, like what inspired you to now. And that's so important. You also missed out that you're doing a PhD, but it's okay. I told you, that proper academic. Yeah. But yeah, that's okay, amongst other things. And I just think, in terms of like, through both of your, and this might be a bit more of a personal question, but through both of your experiences, and I know I asked you already for one key lesson, but what kind of got you into education before we have our break? I think it's good for you to kind of share with us, like, why education, why a teacher? Why did you see that as something that you wanted to do? And then they ask you the same question.
So like, why not? Really? I think about reframing that and thinking, why not? So I guess when you look at the starting points for people and for us, where we are is already on the back foot, and that's already something that's set by the systems and the structures that are in place. And then I think about my own family experience. My family experience was that we were always like 10 steps ahead, because the expectation was that we were going to go from school to college to university to do what success looks like for you. And so for me, I always had an interest in community and in people, but specifically Black communities and in Birmingham. And I thought, where and how can I utilise the skills that I have? So I had an interest in drama and theatre. And I remember really early on in my life thinking about the element of performance and how I could incorporate that within also sharing tools like Lynette about how we can get from one space to another. And I always thought the beginning point for that was early childhood, that a lot of concern is always thinking about the education system starting from primary.
Of course.
Forgetting the early childhood experience and forgetting the most people that use the service of early childhood, services, nurseries, early year spaces are black and brown communities actually, but the people that work in those spaces are predominantly white. And so I thought about the way in which for me to get into education was to think about that very first stage. You're 1 year old, there's pressure for you to go back into work because you have had a child and that child has been unplanned. And this is a story that kind of is quite common within lots of racially marginalised communities. Yes. And I thought about some of those things that impacted mothers, impacted fathers, and it was the pressure to make sure that money was being made and get back into work. So what do you do with your child if you don't have a support network, which is including your family? You put your child into nursery. And so when you think about that, often is the case, we don't think about who's looking after your child when your child is in nursery. You're thinking, who's your child's teacher at school? So you're forgetting this integral part of your kind of character building between 0 and 5, which is such an integral part, as I said, of everybody's life. So that entry into me wanting to work in education was just about that first step. So my mom had basically bought a nursery in 1987. So she started the business that I went on then to go and manage. So when she bought her first nursery in 87, she bought her second nursery in 1994, and I joined the business in 2014. We had a total of 3 nurseries. At one point we had, we had 3 nurseries, but we sold one and then got another, and then sold that one and got another. But we always at any one time had 3-day nurseries. So my mum bought the nursery and then started thinking about ways in which she could apply all of the lessons that she had learned about raising me and my sisters, units, family, village mentality, thinking about who's impacting my black children. And so when she was kind of doing that, I was growing up seeing this model of what success looked like to us, but also as well what it meant to be a black woman, a dark-skinned black woman in business. And also for my mom, particularly a black woman who had come from Jamaica to the country when she was 14 and thought, I can do this, and bought the business as a growing concern. It was already operating. A white woman owned the nursery, and she was like, I can do this. Her kind of coming into this and having money from my dad, money from my granddad to buy the building and to kind of continue this legacy, and then see the kind of demographic of the business change in that it was a nursery which had a lot of white children in it. My mum came in as a dark-skinned black woman, the demographic changed, and that was really interesting for me to see, because I remember these things growing up. When she bought her second business, the business that I went on to manage, as I said, until 2020, the impact that it had, me going in there, number 1, as Yvonne's daughter, but number 2, as me, because I'm me, again, impacted the people that were coming, because now I'm thinking about the generation of people that are having children and also wanting something that is culturally compatible. So that necessity to, again, look at black diaspora, black communities, and again, my excitement about working in education, it meant that I could shape something which looks like what I would want for my children. And not only that, I had control over the curriculum, I had control over who I was employing, and I had control over who was able to come into my space. We all know what it feels like to be in a space when you see yourself. There's an instant feeling of comfort. I also knew what that felt like on the reverse, in that white people, prospective parents coming in, would feel that instant discomfort. And I realised quickly that had nothing to do with me. I'm not interested. I'm here to serve the community, and that community for me looks like what's in this room. And so when I started thinking about how racism was really pervasive and how it worked in early year spaces, that even white parents had reservations about where they were sending their children, that started getting me thinking, oh, this is interesting, because we know how it feels to be my name's Elizabeth. So you've spoken to me on the phone, but you didn't know I was me. And so when you've come into the space, it's that, oh. Or can I speak to the manager? I am the manager. Can I speak to the owner? That's a black woman, that's my mom. So, when you're thinking about the ways in which racism was starting to be really pervasive and the way in which white parents were thinking about where they wanted to send their children, I then started thinking again, education. Education. And also what that meant for the black children that saw themselves in each other as they were playing, under 5, not at primary school, under 5, that integral part of your life. you'll have flashbacks to what you were doing when you were under 5. And isn't it a nice flashback to be like, oh yeah, I remember I went to that nursery and oh, Liz was the manager and oh, she had nails and oh, she had tattoos. Like they were the memories that the children have, because I have a lot to do with them even now. So if you think again, that path into education for me was just about what magic memories are we creating for Black children? What does Black childhood look like? What does Black childhood feel like? Because we are feeling people. And so although we are very much known for welcoming people into our space, we know that we are often made to feel as though we are not welcome in other people's spaces. But we don't often have that kind of impetus and encouragement to just create our own. So when I thought about, as I said, even this journey now, being a trainer and consultant, of course I'm going to call myself the Black Nursery Manager, because our nursery was colloquially known as the Black Nursery. So people be like, oh yeah, it's the Black Nursery. Not in a derogatory way. Yeah, it's the Black Nursery. Yeah, Lizzie's nursery. Yeah, go there. Like, oh, yeah, rice and peas, hard foods. Cornmeal porridge, yeah, Lizzie's nursery. Like that was just standard, so it was normal. So I always had a Black cook. It was always an older Black woman who was cooking the food. We were always serving cornmeal porridge, that's standard. We didn't serve pork because the majority of the children didn't eat pork. I eat bacon, by the way. But I'm saying that's what was happening in the nursery. But those little culturally compatible things
make a difference.
Make a difference. So when you ask me about, you know, why, and that education side of it, it was that education isn't just books.
No, it's not.
And sitting down and learning to read. It's seeing yourself. It's understanding that the food that you eat, you're going to enjoy it. It's knowing that if you want to ask for another fried dumpling, you can. It's about understanding that that is fried dumpling. And even if you were, at any one time, I had like 1 or 2 white children at the nursery, those white children also knew, after dinner, you're creaming your face. We're all doing it. You know, we're all doing that. This is the culture that is in the nursery. So rather than thinking about how we can assimilate into other people's culture, how do other people assimilate into ours?
That's so good.
And that has to happen, as I said, under 5.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I think it's so true, because especially when you grow up in, like, so we, just so everyone knows, we both grew up in Milford Towers at a time together. And when you grow up in certain communities, you don't see any, it's like you live in this like weird bubble for anyone else that has. Like when you grow up in the estate, that's all you know. It's kind of like the world is the estate. So when you come out of for me, we didn't come out of that environment until I went to university, because college was the same. Do you know what I mean? And then so going to uni, and then people like saying, you know, even talking about mental health issues and so on, all of these things, I was like, what are you talking about? Like all of the words that everybody was using in uni, I had no language. I realized I just had no language. Like, and I can even remember saying to my partner that, like, when I first met him, he would describe how he was feeling in moments, and I'd be like, I didn't even understand that people had words for even just how they were feeling, because in where we grew up, it was like you're either happy or you're sad, like something happened or something didn't. So it's so interesting when you're in environments which allow you to express a full range of emotions. And also, you're right, because I had an aha moment when you start going to work and you get on the train. And I used to get on the train sometimes so early in the morning. I used to look on the train, I'd be like, I'm the only Black person in this carriage, I need to walk to another carriage. Only Black person. Like, I would do a game, like, how long is it gonna take me going into the city until I see another Black person? And I'm just like, what is going on? So it was always really, I always kind of went through life first thinking that I belonged because the estate protected me in that way. But then coming out of the estate thinking, oh my goodness, I'm just out in this world and like nobody understands my experience. Because when you are thrown into the world, even though I don't like to say that, like, I don't like to use the word minority per se, but you really do feel like that when you go into the world.
It's not that you're a minority, it's that you've been minoritized.
Yes, exactly.
And it's about looking back at the system and the structure. The system and the structure minoritizes us. So we become racially minoritized, we become marginalized. And what happens is when you're coming from an quote unquote inner city and estate, the people that are interested in doing that kind of social anthropological, like, oh, let's have a little voyeur, let's have a little look, are middle-class white women who then want to come out of their suburbs to come and teach in the schools, to come and work in the nurseries where, oh, the poor little Black and brown children. And then you're moving into white saviorism territory. And when you're getting into white saviorism, there's a whole heap of problems that are existing there. So when I'm doing my work in early years spaces, I have a lot of, you know, and that's why I generalise them as Karens. I have a lot of Karens who dominate the early years space, who say, it goes like this, it goes like that, it goes like the other, it doesn't. And what they're saying is that they know best, we're here to learn from them. No. you're here to learn from the children.
Yeah.
And it's about that reframing and that repositioning, but that has to happen in the early years. And you can only do that if you give black children agency to say, yeah, I come from the estate and this is my experience. Yeah, I come from this part of wherever and this is my experience. You're here to learn from me. Repositioning and reframing so that you have got little black boys that grow up with emotional literacy. So that you have got black parents who feel empowered. That you have got experience of knowing what it feels like to speak in a room amongst your people and not feel like I have to shrink myself.
Or I have to say differently. Talk differently.
I remember my mum was always in the education sector and I was like, nope, I'm not going through that stress. Also, the school that we went to, like, everyone was Bradbury, so I was like, never going to be in education. Like, I don't think it pays enough to go through all that stress. But when I did my master's, so I mentioned that award that I had won. So I got invited to a UN conference for them to kind of be like, oh, these are our winners of this writing competition. And out of that whole conference, there must have been like 150 people. 2 of us were black and 1 was Asian, everyone else was white. So the Asian man came up to me at the end and he was like, it's incredible that like you're here and being shouted out for this prize, because it's like we're barely visible in this conference and it's a UN conference and it's about sustainable development goals. So there's like a UN goal for 2030 where we're supposed to achieve things like no poverty, no hunger, quality education. Everybody's supposed to be in good employment by 2030, which we're not going to achieve, but it's a UN goal. So this conference was about unis coming together and discussing how they're going to achieve these goals and how they're going to educate the business leaders of the future to ensure that their businesses will strategize for achieving these goals. So he was like, I need to introduce you to people. So he invited me to his university, and this was in London, in Bloomsbury in London, and they were having a meeting with the Association of Commonwealth Universities. So Commonwealth Universities is basically colonial universities, but they work across universities that are still under the monarchy, the Queen's monarchy, and they kind of call themselves like one community that are all trying to educate people in these countries in the Caribbean, in Asia, in Africa. And they were having a meeting about becoming more inclusive. So it was loads of academics and I was thinking, why have I been invited to this meeting? Like, cool, like this prize was all well and good and I've got my master's now, but I'm not qualified to be in a meeting with these academics. And they were talking about, okay, inclusion, how are we going to get more minority students involved with or participating in university life. And they went around the table and I'm just observing and listening. And after about 30 minutes, their solution was a hackathon. And like I've told you guys already that I had health issues in university. I suffered with imposter syndrome. I had to work 2 jobs. Would a hackathon have helped me? Like, a hackathon's not going to help me to overcome those issues. So I spoke up and I was like, you lot are academics, like you lot research all the time, like you lot are in the field, like how is this your solution and why are you guys all excited about the solution? So the dean of the university spoke to me at the end and he was like, do you know what, we want to invite you to do a lecture, a guest lecture at our university about your field of study because you're saying something that we've never heard before. And I went and did that guest lecture, and from there they invited me to become a sessional lecturer. So a sessional lecturer is basically like supply teaching. It's like you come when there's availability. So from that became a permanent one, and then became a senior lecturer in business. But before that, I would have never even considered myself qualified, and I wouldn't have thought about the education field. But it was just through speaking up at that meeting that I was kind of offered this opportunity from someone who seemed to get it. Whereas the rest of them, it was, even I remember mentioning in that meeting, like, why don't you guys tap into your ACS? Like, that's a audience that comes together all the time. You have a captive audience there. Go there and ask them, what are your needs? What do you need? I said ACS because I assumed that all universities would know what ACS means. They didn't know what it meant. I had to literally say African Caribbean Society, and then they're like, oh, okay, we get it now. So for him, he has like a Caribbean wife, so he was like, this is what we need. Like, I want to get more people involved, and we need people with voices like yours, and da da da. And I remember, so did the lecture, and then coming into the university as a lecturer, they asked me to help set up an ACS, an African Caribbean Society, and the person who I partnered with was the student of the guild. I remember him coming back to me after we had done all our plannings and developed our proposal, and he said that the board of the university had turned it down because it was too exclusive. Wow. Like, it was excluding other students. So that was a downside, and that kind of enlightened me to what was going on at the university. So although I accepted the role as lecturer, I was like, you know what, my research specialism is going to be the Black attainment gap. It's not specifically to do with business, but I do think like it's a business-related issue, because the Black attainment gap is about making sure that your university performs better, is making sure that you recruit the right people. So put my proposal in for that to be my research specialism. And I remember my line manager coming to me. First question, she said two things. So the first thing she said was, so can I say black? Is that okay? Is that not offensive to say black? So this would have been 2019, 2018 actually, she still felt like the word black was offensive. And I'm thinking, these are academics. These are people that are teaching our students. These are the people that are preparing them for the working world, and the people who are meant to be the liberal thinkers of society, and they're still scared to say the word black. So that was my first kind of red flag. And then the second thing that she said was, do you know what, this is a great research field, but it's not something that's really aligned with anything that we're doing at the university at the moment, and it might rub people the wrong way, so let's park it. A year into the job, there's a NCS, so there's NCS and there's also UCAS, and they all kind of came together, developed a report, and they spoke about the Black attainment gap, which I know we're going to speak about a bit later. So the Black attainment gap looks at the disparity between graduate outcomes for Black graduates and also their peers. So white graduates predominantly, but also any other peers from any other ethnic group, we are still behind in terms of the grades that we're graduating at. And that was my specialism because of my experience in university, which I've already shared. I knew that I could have performed better if my health was better, if I felt a bit more included, if I was more confident to speak out about needing support. But because I didn't do any of those things, I felt like, let me suffer in silence, and that impacted my performance, and then that impacted my confidence to go for the jobs that I really wanted to go for. So when I was looking to study that at university or in the university as a lecturer, they turned that down. Then the UCAS produced this report, and they said that we're not going to fund any universities anymore unless you reduce the Black attainment gap. All of a sudden, I was interested in the research that I wanted to do. I was like, Lynette, come and we're going to develop a Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Yeah. Come and be the academic lead for it. So I was like, cool. Like, I know you lot are doing this for the money, but the thing is, this work is important. So although I know that the intention behind it isn't genuine, I know that it needs to be done. Yeah. So cool, I'm going to be the academic lead. Then I was like, come and be the chair of the Widening Participation Forum. And widening participation is about getting more young people or more students engaged with academia. So saying that it's not just about coming to university, going to your classes and coming back, but how do you engage with your lecturers? What kind of support do you request? There's a lot of grants available. How do we get you to engage with more of them? There's a lot of events that are put on by universities. How do we get you to engage with that so that by the time you're leaving, you're a lot more involved with university, and that might affect your grades and your performance, as well as it's affected your peers. So I chaired that, and I did the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I spoke at a national conference, so like the biggest kind of university body for the UK is called Advanced HE, so Advanced Higher Education. Spoke about that conference, about needing to recruit more Black women to professor level specifically, because when we think about intersectionality, there's the issue of being a Black person, but there's also the issue of being a Black woman. And we are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of ethnicity pay gap and gender pay gap, and just our presence, the amount of Black women who are professors in universities hasn't even reached 10 yet in 2022. So a lot of my research and a lot of my presentations and a lot of the speeches that I give at conferences are about that. And if I'm honest, the reception that I've got has not been ideal from universities. A lot of the great reception that I get is from charities and from local authorities, but universities themselves are not yet willing to do that work. Like they'll kind of do these performative things and performative measures, but they're not yet at the point where they're willing to recruit black women to that point. So I'm still kind of in that fight of trying to get black women recognised as equally, if not even equally, like overqualified to be in these roles, because aside from their roles as lecturers, they're very often the mentor for people within their university and also students outside of their university, because when you're a black student in university, you don't necessarily have your role models within that same university. So you might look to other universities and reach out to them. So they end up having this big unpaid burden of being a mentor to so many young people and trying to guide so many young people into the right career fields or into the right postgraduate studies, but none of this is paid. So it's a lot of labour and it's a lot of burden which goes unpaid, unrewarded, unrecognised. And I'm trying to make sure that that stuff gets compensated, because I don't think that black women are going to stop doing the work, but I think it's important for universities and academia in general to kind of meet their needs and support them and provide them with the resources to continue to do that work, because otherwise the black attainment gap, I don't believe, will be reduced. So
thank you.
Fell into that, but I think
it's everything kind of aligned to happen.
Yeah.
And you could tell that these two are like teachers, lecturers, educators because of how they answer questions. It's just this discussion based. It's very thorough, right? Yeah. And it's so interesting that the points that you put forward, because I work as a diversity inclusion. I manage diversity inclusion for Microsoft, and also a program, and also run the recruitment for Western Europe. And I'm not even joking. I probably shouldn't have said Microsoft. Oh God. But one thing I will say this. One thing that I find that is so like crazy is I just sometimes just think I'm just talking common sense. Like, do you ever just feel like that? Like
all the time.
Oh, we just don't know how we can. This is not Microsoft, but another company I worked for, they were like, oh, I just don't know how to like, you know, black people are not just, they're not coming into the business. Like, how do we? And I'm like, what's your attraction plan? What do you mean, what's our attraction plan? I'm like, this is in America. And I was like, there was like, what's your attraction plan? And I'm like, aren't they HSBUs? I know that because I watch TV. Like, it's not because I've researched it. I just know there's historically black colleges because I saw it somewhere, maybe on One-on-One or Nickelodeon when I was young, not even like recent. I just came in my head and they were like, what's that? I'm like, you are the head of diversity and inclusion. You are a white woman and you're asking me what is a HS, what? And you know, sometimes you think it's so ridiculous that you think they're taking the mick, but they actually don't know. It's like two different worlds. And it's like, when we're talking about culture, especially when you talked about the nursery, those are the things that, in my experience, especially working with recruitment, when I interview people, they just don't know. Do you know what I mean? They just don't know. And especially our people, it's like, I'll be talking to white guys, I always say this, and the first thing they say is, oh, how much does this pay? It's, hello, hi, yeah, this is the role. But before you can even get to that, they want to know how much it's paid. And specifically black women, specifically Caribbean black women, African girls as well, second generation Caribbean girls, then afterwards African girls, they will not ask for the salary. Like, and I know that that's such a generalization, but honestly, I've seen it so much. Like, at the end, I'm like, do you have any questions? Oh. I'm like, and you know, you can't actually say, ask what the salary is, but it's like, you're just so thankful for the opportunity and you feel like your work, it doesn't amount to even, because you've been socialized to feel like your education, your qualifications, because again, for us to even get onto the table, we've already got that, plus, especially as black women, and then we don't feel empowered enough to be like, are you going to pay me? Yeah. Or if you are going to pay me, let me negotiate my pay because you're probably not going to pay me enough. And I think it's such an interesting conversation. So just to piggyback off of what you were both talking about, Liz, in terms of black people within the education space, like within education, within the system, how do you think it affects them? And that's a bit of a direct question, but how do you think the educational system affects specifically black people?
I think when we're looking at this, as I said, it has to start from the beginning, and as a society, as a plethora of different communities under the umbrella of black, we have to think about what we are feeding our children. What are the conversations we are having? What are we doing when we're speaking life into children? And what does it mean to speak life into a black child? We know that we are people who are moved by energies, we're moved by spirit. So that unknowing, that thing that you're saying is like, white people just don't know. And there's a thing that as black people, we just know. We just know what it is. So if we just know that knowing is what we have to speak into our children so that they have that innate self-belief that they can go into a space when they're older and negotiate a salary. You remember that saying, you know, give me the energy of a mediocre white man, you know? Because that's what a lot of us need to understand. There are mediocre white men out there, as you said, who are going in, and the first question they're asking is about salary. Going into a space where I am managing my own business and I'm growing a business, my rate card is the first thing that I send out in emails. And in fact, I don't send it out. My assistant sends it out. And it's really interesting, the reception that that gets. Number one, because my assistant is white South African. And number two, because my business is called the Black Nursery Manager. So make no mistake, you better know you have to say black. And I do that with intention, because when I'm at events and I'm speaking or white people have to get their tongue around the word black, because you're introducing me as Liz Pemberton, the director of the Black Nursery Manager, and I don't want to hear any stuttering. I don't want to hear you make any mistakes. I want you to say that with intention, because we have to start getting used to owning who we are and also owning our blackness.
And also don't care about other people feeling uncomfortable to even do it. Do you know what I mean? Because we like to make people feel comfortable.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that's part of the social conditioning of black womanhood, of black people. I think there is this expectation that we're going to go in and shrink. And that's why, as I said, and you will have seen, Ivy, because you've been Instagram stalking me.
That's
you know,
true.
when I go to places, you know, I like to show up. I like to make sure that my face is always beat, my nails are always done. You know, I'm out here. Yeah, that's a part of who I am. I'm not going to shrink myself to make Karen feel more comfortable. That's none of my business. In the same way as I said when I had my nursery, it's none of my business. What people think is none of my business. I want to make sure this is a haven for black children where they can be unapologetically themselves. So when we are looking to, as we grew up, you know, I'm 10 years older, but growing up, you would look at the TV and look at African Americans, and we were really imported with a lot of things around how black Americans lived. And one of the things that attracted us to that was that unapologetic nature of that. But we also know that exists within Caribbean, African diasporas. This is a sense of pride is something that we've always had. We have been taught to lose that in the effries of what's going on. And I think that's the thing. We have to stop looking externally for our validation. Our validation exists within our spaces and within us. We have to teach children that from the get-go, from the jump. And when we're looking at some of the statistics that follow early childhood, we have to think about what's happening even before children are coming into the world. Black children, we know what the Embrace report has told us. We know that black women are 4 times more likely to die in child. So even if we think about the trauma under which black children are coming into the world, before they have even started, there is trauma associated. So when white academics are talking about adverse childhood experiences, why are they not also talking about black maternal health?
And so how that can affect the children.
There you go. So I'm saying you haven't got the range.
And I think that's why you then bring in people like that. And do you know what's so funny when you said the word black? Because they used to, especially, I've worked in like with all these software engineers, all white guys, and like maybe there'll be another black person, and I used to make them feel so uncomfortable. Like they would be like, oh, so-and-so isn't in. So-and-so is the only other black person. I'm the other black person. Or because I'd be interviewing, right? So as a recruiter, obviously I'm bringing in black people. Like, what do you think this is? So the person would be sitting in the lobby and they'd have to call me, and I'd always pretend, if it was a black person, I'd pretend, and I'd be like, oh, what do they look like? They have glasses. What do they look like? And then I'm like, what's their name? Oh, I didn't catch it because they didn't get their name. So they're like, they're describing the person. I said, is it the black one?
Same.
What the hell? You're describing it. Oh, I think she had a shirt on, turning red. And I'm like, the black one. Oh, she had a shirt and she's everything to not say black. And you're just like, what is wrong? You don't even feel, if you can't feel comfortable saying the word, how can you feel comfortable with me even being here? It's offensive. Like, I know that like, it's really funny, but at the same time, I'm thinking, how are you thinking about me then? Like, I'm black, and it's the rubbish that people talk about when they say, I don't see colour, I don't see... Yes, you do, I'm black. And it's actually offensive to not see colour.
It's part of the socialisation process of white people to be told that they're not supposed to identify people by colour. So adopting this approach where you don't see colour makes them feel as though they're doing the right thing. And in actual fact, as you said, it's more harmful. If you don't see my colour, as a child, if you don't see that I'm a black child, you're not going to see the discrimination that I'm going to face. You're not going to see the impacts of racism for me. You're not going to be able to manage how I interact in this space. If you choose to, we all treat the children the same. No, I don't want you to treat the children the same because my child's black.
Exactly.
So cream their face. Make sure that when I come in, their nose is wiped. Make sure that when I come in, you've told me what they've eaten and when they went to the toilet, did they poo? What's happening? I want you to see everything about my child. Now, the unsaid is, when I was managing my nursery, these were the things that was just standard.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you're right, well, go on, you might know such and such from when back that time, that you might know such and such as cousins, uncles, but it's community.
Yeah.
And within that is the unsaid that I know how my man's going to be, you know, so when he comes, make sure that it's that conversation, and that's the level of casual energy you should have.
Yes.
Because white nurseries have that all the time.
Yeah, they do.
We're expected to assimilate.
Yes.
No, not in big 2022.
No, it's true.
I keep on saying, sorry before you get in, my granddad didn't come here in 1954 for me to still be having this conversation in 2022. Things are not supposed to go, it's not supposed to run like this. So we have to be really, really intentional about how we're changing this now without the talk.
Yes, and
it's
actually
action.
just doing it.
Yeah.
And we were speaking about nursery, but also the curriculum. Lynette, how do you feel the curriculum supports or doesn't support black people? Because even if we talk about black kids, obviously you've seen them from the age, from they're born, really, and then you carry them through secondary school, through primary school, and then Lynette, you're teaching them at university, for example. Through that, how do you think the curriculum affects them at that stage? And then I'll ask you the same question: how does it affect them when they're younger?
I think it's still it's very colonialised. I do a bit of work with the Mayor of London. We have this commission called Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm, and our kind of mission is to get London's streets, our buildings, our memorials, our statues more representative of our diverse curriculum. And we had a meeting this week with just educators and activists across London who are trying to get their curriculums more decolonialised. And as much as the public-facing kind of communications might make us seem like things have changed, our pupils, our students, our young people, they're still doing role-playing, cosplay of slavery in the classroom. So Black history is about pretending that somebody is a slave owner and the ruler is the whip. So, you know, the fate sent me a ruler, they're using that as a whip in the classroom every October and using that to reenact slaverism. I laugh, but it's not funny. And then they have oppression, like Black history, the representativeness of Black people in the curriculum. Their idea of decolonialisation is teaching young Black people about racism, but there was a whole lifetime before racism, there's a whole lifetime during racism, there's been a whole lifetime after racism. There's been so many inspirational and powerful Black people that they're not trying to expose them to. I think it's very intentional that they're still showing young people that Black means to be oppressed, Black means to be a slave, Black means to be subservient, because I think that enables young Black people to not dream too big, to not be too loud, to not kind of expect more and own who they are and expect that decolonization should happen. Renee's face is bothering me. I'm like, it's something there. Okay. I think the curriculum has a long way to go. A lot of the educators that I work with through LMU are leaving their work. I worked with a head of year, she's head of year 10 throughout 2021, and we did a lot of work with LMU where we were exposing them to Black people who are just doing incredible things across industries, and they put on their first cultural night in November off the back of Black History Month, and she ended up leaving. She was like, the change is not happening, it's not going to happen here. My co-founder, she left her uni and left the country actually, because she was like, the change that I wanted to see, the reason I got into education, it's not going to happen here. So as much as we see things, as much as things are communicated to us as changing, our youth are still being taught that to be Black means to be oppressed, to be Black means to be powerless, to be Black means to not have a voice. So for me, the curriculum still has such a long way to go, even from that early age in secondary school, because I think that they spend so much time in school, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that those people have so much responsibility for the socialization of your child, and yet the things that they're teaching them to believe about themselves are scary. I'm also a school governor of a secondary school, and we had a governor's meeting on sometime this week, Wednesday, and it was about the curriculum. The committee that I sit in on is the Curriculum and Achievement Committee, and they were reporting to us that Black youth are still 3 times more likely to be excluded than their peers. And for Black Caribbean youth, it's 5 times more likely. And the reasons for exclusion have been pretty consistent throughout the past 5 years. However, during the pandemic, so 2020 onwards, drug and alcohol abuse has risen sufficiently in terms of the reason that they've been excluded. So for me, the first question I asked the safeguarding leads who told us this was, have you looked into exploitation? Like, what's the reason that they're starting to abuse drug and alcohol? Who's introducing them to drugs and alcohol? And her response to me, a white woman who's the safeguarding lead for this predominantly Black secondary school in Lewisham Borough, was that it's not our responsibility to ask them these questions and to figure out who's introducing them to alcohol. If they're bringing it onto the premises, then it's our responsibility to report them, to call the police when it's necessary, and to exclude them. But finding out why, finding out the root cause, is not their responsibility. So I'm thinking Child Q is not an anomaly. It's happening all the time. And then we went on to Child Q specifically, and there was a sentence about adultification, and they were talking about how no child should be adultified and that they should be seen as at risk as opposed to the risk. So I raised this in the meeting. I was like, you guys are saying that they should be seen as at risk instead of the risk, but then you're not figuring out why the drug and alcohol increase has happened and who's introducing them to them and whether they're being exploited. Like, this clashes with a statement that you're making to us as governors. So I think the curriculum has such a long way to go at all levels. At that secondary school level, I'm not too engaged with early years and primary school, so I don't know what's happening, but I think if that's what's happening at secondary school, which is still their formative years, then I'm not really hopeful for the people that we're entrusting with them for 35 hours a week. And then you get to secondary school. I've already spoken about the Black attainment gap, so something is happening during those 3 to 4 years. Like, you're going into university on par with your peers. So all of you are entering with the same grade. So me and you are entering, both having had A's, A, B, C, for example. You're a white person, I'm a Black person. Why is it that at the end of those 3 or 4 years, I'm the one that's 2.5 times less likely than you to graduate with a 2-1 and above? And that's happening 2.5 times more for Black youth than any other youth. Like, there's no way you can tell me that there's not something that's happening during those 3 to 4 years that's affecting their performance. So curriculum is affecting them in secondary school, it's affecting them in uni. I don't know what's happening in college because I'm not too engaged with college, but from what I'm seeing in secondary school and uni, we're entrusting the wrong people with the education and the socialisation and the conditioning of our children, because education is conditioning and socialisation. So if we're entrusting those people, then we need to be parent governors. We need to be on those boards in schools and at universities, asking them, why are they being excluded more than their peers? Why are they only learning to see themselves as people who are oppressed and people who don't have a voice and people who don't have a power? And then in secondary school, why is it that they're graduating less confident and more mentally impaired than their white peers? There's something happening that we need to get more involved with, because I don't think that decolonisation is just about what you're learning. I think it's also who is teaching you and what are their beliefs and their values and their attitudes.
And it's also the conditions that we're in, right? Because like James Baldwin, who I love, he said that there's nothing more expensive than to be poor and to live in spaces where you lack resource, even if you're not poor. If you live in deprived areas and because with catchment areas, you go to a particular school, that school is in your local area, that school then doesn't have as much resources. And I can remember for me, I went to schools that were poorly funded. There's so many youths in the class, supply teachers who didn't do nothing. So there was a lack of resource and understanding. So even though we might come into university, they're saying we're not, because when you're going there, people, they're folding up their new laptop, and I'm like with software and that you're just so behind in ways that are not just about education, but also about resource, also about your experience within education, and also your treatment, especially as a Black girl in education, like us being in PE and saying that we're on it's that time of the month, and the teacher's saying to you, keep running, but then the white girls, they're in the corner, and they've been given a different treatment. So I think all of those things subconsciously do condition your mind to make you feel that education isn't for me. Do you know what I mean? Like, it might not be something that you're thinking on the forefront, but you feel like this thing that I'm doing because it's what I'm supposed to be doing, in the long run, isn't supportive of me. Like it's not inclusive of me. So I think that that's a good point too.
And off the back of that, I'm just going to be really quick and
you know,
talk for a
these
long
teachers,
time.
I got through the questions.
But I think for education, I think the kind of schools that we go to, they teach you to be subservient. So a teacher imparts knowledge on you and you just accept it.
Yeah.
You don't question it. You're not taught to be kind of inquisitive. Whereas the white students who are going to private schools or better schools, they're taught to be inquisitive. They're taught to question it. And then in university, you're expected to be asking questions, but you've never had the practice of that, and you've been taught to put up and shut up and just accept the knowledge. So in university, you're already behind and you're already not fitting in with the culture because you haven't had that practice of asking questions and being inquisitive of your lecturers. And that's something that you're expected to do further into careers and employment. So that culture fit is not just about employment. There's also a lack of culture fit in universities as well. I met with one of my old colleagues today and she was saying that she had an hour and a half interview. It's meant to be 10 minutes for her presentation and then 15 minutes for her answering questions. It ended up being 10 minutes for her presentation. She spent 10 minutes answering questions. Then the rest of the time she was asking the questions to the interviewers, and they ended up running out of time and telling her, sorry, we can't answer any more questions. But she's already had that practice.
She white?
Sorry, I should have said that. She's a white girl. She's had that practice of being inquisitive to her lecturers, to her employers. So she's already got that kind of cultural kind of fit. Whereas we aren't taught that. We're taught to shut up, otherwise we're disruptive.
Yeah, or that you talk too much, which is what I always got. So going from the curriculum, but I also want you to answer this question. Because you're obviously Black Nursery Manager, which already says, you know, the only one, that Black nursery, right? What is the importance of representation within education?
I think we need to be mindful about representation politics, full stop. I don't think representation means anything in that. Not all skin folk are kinfolk, we know that. So when we're looking at representation, we've got to be really careful about the way in which we have the conversation. There has to be nuance to it because not everybody's on the same journey. We're not homogenous. We do not all think the same because we have the same racialized identity. We don't all have the same lived experience because we have the same racialized identity. And also, if we're looking at the intersection of class, we're not all coming from poverty. Statistically, yes, we may be at the bottom of the totem pole. However, there are levels to this. And also, there are expectations that we all have for our own life and this agency that we should never, ever lose sight of in terms of like what we desire, what we want, and how we feed those needs. So when you're talking about curriculum is important to an extent. However, I don't want a white teacher who has no lived experience of what it means to be racially minoritized to teach my children about Black history. No, I don't. So it could be in the curriculum a little more. I don't want you to do that because you haven't got the range. And so when we're talking about curriculum, we've got to be really mindful about what we say, what we mean. In the early years, there's lots of policy guidance and guidelines, non-statutory and statutory guidance that we have. And the Department for Education has a statutory EYFS, the Statutory Early Years Foundation stage. Now within that, how that works and how we interpret that looks very different. So the statutory guidance, as I said, is dictated by the Department for Education. The non-statutory guidance, there are 2 documents, both of which I've had involvement in, writing, shaping, advocating for, and ensuring there's parts in that talk about the need for anti-racist practice and an anti-racist lens. So for me in the early years, it was important that, number one, I'm hyper-visible. I'm here, there, everywhere. Anybody that engages with me on social media knows that about me. I don't shy away from any area of where we're thinking about early years. I want my name and my brand and my business to be synonymous with Black children in the early years. If you're thinking about the early years, you're thinking about the Black Nursery Manager. That just has to happen, right? And the hypervisibility of me means that more people get involved with having the conversation and thinking about what the action looks like. So when I'm involved in shaping non-statutory guidance and thinking about talking to people in rooms about what is on this guidance, what's going to be happening on the floor when we're going into nurseries, what are practitioners going to be doing with the children? Are we going to be challenging, as you said, developing those critical skills where we're looking at things and not just accepting it? I'll give you an example. In the Department for Education statutory, non-statutory guidance, which was, it's a document called the Development Matters. There was a paragraph in there which said that children should explore ethnicities by trying on different wigs. No. So when I said no, it wasn't just a no, just out there in the... it was a no to, let me just speak to the manager. So I went directly to the person that I needed to speak to and challenged it straight off the bat. You know, and that white man was very embarrassed. But that was not my concern. This is the running theme. That's not my concern. My concern is that this exists in some guidance that's been going to go out to early years practitioners, and they're going to start then trying on Afro wigs to be like, oh, look, I'm a black person. Because that is how it's going to be interpreted in a literal sense. And so when we're thinking about the exploration of identity through play, that needs to have a totally different look and feel for black children and for children who aren't black as well. And thinking about using that as the default, we're not looking at children who aren't white. Let's think about children who aren't black. Let's reframe and refocus this, okay? Because we are existing in these spaces and we have every right to be here, and children feel that from the off. So in terms of kind of guidance and what's written, yes, it's important, but I think the work in early years is really centralized around family for a reason. What's happening in our families? How are we having conversations with our families? Not to say that we have to take the blame, because we're not to blame, but we have to really think about the conversations we're having in our families, in our units, and our extended families as well. How are we shaping children's expectations and experiences, and thinking about giving them those skills? If anybody knows a 2-year-old here, anybody knows a 3-year-old, they will talk up the things. If they're not happy, they'll tell you. If they think something's not fair, they'll say that's not fair. And the biggest question that they ask is why? Why? Why do I have to do this? A 2-year-old will ask you why. They will challenge that. We have to continue to develop those skills in the early years. Don't ever tell children, don't ask me why. Ask them, ask me more. Tell me, challenge me. Get to their level. Ask, and physically and emotionally and mentally get to their level. Tell me why, and they will tell, wow, I don't think that, and I thought that, and I saw that. Encourage that. We have to get into the habit of encouraging our children to challenge, to be critical, and to always ask questions, to continue to be inquisitive. Because the minute that we, as parents, caregivers, adults, silence that silence becomes prevalent throughout the whole of their life. So we're equipping them to go into an education system, and then we want them to ask questions, but we've told them for 5 years, don't ask me nothing. Wait till I talk to you. And that is very much embedded within our cultures, within our positionality as adults, as carers, as parents, and we need to stop it because it's dangerous. Because what happens is that we get into our 20s, we get into our 30s, and we feel like we can't ask our parents questions.
It's the same because it goes into salary as well.
I was about to get into spirit then, you know.
I was like, it goes into salary though as well, right? Because we're talking about, because it's a trickle down
all
thing.
Of this links in, and so I'm
thing.
saying I want people to start thinking about black children under 5. Stop thinking about 7-year-olds. I want you to think about black children at 1, at 2, at 3. I want you to have conversations. When I'm walking on the street and I see people walking with black children, I say hello to them. I don't care if they think that I'm a crazy. I say hello, and they will say hello back. But people know when you've got an energy and a spirit for children, and the children will tell you if they don't like you, they don't chat to you. And encourage that. Also tell children they don't have to say hello back to you. Give them agency. We have to start doing that collectively, because we have to show people how we're supposed to be treated. We have to show black children how they're supposed to be treated. And we have to tell them, if somebody says to you, hello, if you feel like saying hello back, say hello. If you don't have to. Because on the other hand, we're saying don't talk to strangers, or, you know, that person's your uncle, Then we get into the conversation about safeguarding. We get into a conversation about bodily agency. We get into a conversation that we have to have. And it's about, as I said, developing those critical skills under 5. We do not trust our children enough. We have to start speaking life into them.
And I think what you were saying as well is so key to how it travels through at different stages of their lives.
Of course.
Because when we talk about, especially black people within like candidates and recruitment and getting roles and so on, you ask them to be empowered and they've never been empowered. And it's so interesting because they go back home like, I haven't got that job or whatever it is, and a lot of the scrutiny comes from their peers and from their family because they feel like, oh, I haven't been able to do what everybody's telling me I should be able to do. I should get an education, I should go to university, and then I'll get a job. And then when the world is already against you or isn't enabling you to have the same opportunities as other people, how have you equipped them to be able to ask those questions and to make that money if
And
we
we
always
should-
tell them to be quiet?
Yeah, and we should be able to lean back into our core. And that's why I'm saying, if people say to you, oh, you're really articulate, you're really intelligent, you're really confident. Well, of course I am. What am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be? So when we are taught to lean back into our core as to who we are, nothing should come as a surprise.
Yeah.
White people are forever surprised that we're so confident, that we're so articulate, like we're still on the plantation. Are you silly? And even when we were on the plantation, we were making plans to get out. So I'm saying, in terms of rebuilding and reassessing ourselves within this current climate and framework, listen, it's really important, as I said, that we invest in children under 5. They know who they are. I believe that children choose their parents. They choose to come into this universe. They choose to get involved with what is happening. We have to continue to pour into them, because I really believe that by the time they are institutionalized within this miseducation system, it's far too late. There's so many things that inherently you've kind of just learned and you reenact. And it becomes second nature, and you stop questioning. And so when we start talking about, and I know we're getting a little bit, off track, but when we start thinking about kind of relationship forming and relationship building, any kind of relationship, we also want to make sure that we have that agency and we have that sense of self to be able to say, actually, no, that's not how I want to be treated. I don't like this.
We were talking about that, weren't we? We were talking about, just on the side, we were talking about expectations as well. And yes, I know we don't have a lot of time, but we were talking about expectations, and we were talking about how, especially in our communities, we're not empowered to even discuss, or especially as Black women, to say we have certain expectations, because the world, schooling, education has told us we don't even have a leg to stand on to even expect anything. And obviously we were like, it's not happening. It's just not happening. But I know that we need to wrap up, because, and I'm so sad because we had like one more question, but we do have Sam who's going to wrap this up. He's going to talk a little bit about his experience, and then he's also going to open the floor for a Q&A.
Just listening to you both is like super inspiring, and I think first of all, like, you being leaders first and foremost, but also I think being in a room full of Black people, we don't necessarily, I don't need to explain the adversities that you've had to overcome to be the leaders that you are in your respective fields. So honestly, first of all, just want to honour you both, because that was super inspiring. So I guess, I'm Sam. I grew up in Southwark, neighbouring borough, South London. So I grew up in Peckham, went to school there, was raised there. And for me, hearing all of these stories just kind of is such a throwback, because from primary school I was excluded, secondary school got excluded, but all of those experiences have really, for me, come back to mind, especially this last week, because I'm a student here at the London Interdisciplinary School, and I've dropped out of uni before, and being here it's been an incredible experience. So for those who don't know, the London Interdisciplinary School, it's a new and innovative university where we learn through understanding and approaching complex problems. And when I say an interdisciplinary lens, it's about learning about different academic disciplines, but actually seeing what are those connections and how can we understand and approach problems more holistically, right? So it's interesting. I'll talk about it after some people. But so for me, this journey has been crazy. Like this week, so I'm in my 3rd term, and this week I got diagnosed with severe ADHD. And again, all of these experiences and all these adversities that you've both been speaking about, being a young man, a young boy, going through the whole education system and actually a criminal justice system as well, and never being diagnosed or even being asked the questions about what could possibly be your challenges, right? You're seen as a Black boy, so it's either you're aggressive, you're naughty, you don't listen, but actually these diagnoses or whatever, they're real challenges. And I think, Liz, like working with 0 to 5, there's certain traits that you can identify and understand, and it's not a shock that more likely a white young boy is more likely to be actually diagnosed at an earlier age than a young Black boy. So that's kind of been my experience. And I'm, I guess, honestly grateful for being in a place like the London Interdisciplinary School, which is trying to do things more innovative, and it's it's exciting to see that they're actually trying to change and trying to help students understand themselves a lot better. But it's briefly about myself. But I guess my first question would be actually I'll do it for you, Lynette, you're looking at me. But from your understanding of the education system, what would you say is a key lever that needs to be shifted that we can actually begin to move the needle on the black attainment gap?
Diversity inclusion, equality and diversity inclusion, whatever they call it, is about recruiting people into the space, but you're not recruiting them into a space where they can thrive. You're often recruiting them into an all boys club where they feel very uncomfortable, they can't bring their full selves to work, and therefore they can't perform to their full potential. So I think, first of all, recruiting them to positions where they can progress and get to leadership positions so that they can represent the people who are coming after them, and also so that they can kind of knock down the barriers that students are facing, because I think our lived experiences are quite niche, and I don't believe that a white professor or a white man who hasn't had those lived experiences, again, thinking about my health issues, thinking about the estate that I came from, like all the examples that I gave you, if you don't get it, you don't get it, that's fine, but then have diversity of thought within your institution so that there's somebody who will get it and somebody will be like, okay, cool, they didn't make that grade, but you know what, I see the potential, they're showing up, they're kind of in their essays, the ones, because some essays you get to kind of be a bit more free and kind of choose what you're going to kind of write about, and in that, are you really looking at and kind of understanding what they're speaking about, and are you seeing the potential in that? And if you're seeing the potential, then grow that and give them that space to kind of fulfill their potential, whereas right now it's very rigid. It's like, okay, we'll set you a question, we'll tell you what is knowledge and what isn't knowledge, and you'll consume that, and whatever you remember in the assessment and in the essay, that will determine how smart you are. So I think at the moment it's very rigid and very, you have to meet us where we're at, whereas if there's a lot more progression to leadership at more senior and authoritative levels, then that will make education a lot more contextualised, and that's a lot of what my doctorate is about. It's about, are we looking at the context, or are we just imparting knowledge on young people and expecting them to take that back to their communities where they don't have the resources, where they're in poverty, where they might be dealing with abuse, where they might be dealing with isolation, and expecting them to take this knowledge that we taught them in the classroom and apply that, although their context doesn't match the context that we're teaching them in. So I think representation of lived experiences, not just representation, because like you said, all skin folk, so representation of lived experience is really important.
Thanks, Annette. That was very successful.
I got there.
Yeah, no, it was very right, okay, and we've got some questions time.
One thing I wanted to talk about was like Bob Marley. I know that's not, people might think something of it, but when I was in my government and politics class, I remember, and this is talking about asking questions, I remember we were talking about Jamaican politics, and I said, like, Bob Marley is definitely like a key to this kind of thing in terms of his political perspective. And my government and politics teacher told me Bob Marley is just a musician kind of thing in front of the whole class. And I didn't question him because I thought to myself, he's right, he's my teacher kind of thing. Yeah. If I knew what I knew now about Bob Marley today and I could confront him, that's a different story. But that's just the commentary I wanted to get off. I just wanted to ask two questions. When I was in secondary school, we used to sell sweets and crisps and all of this kind of thing. So it was business. We were doing business. We were making money. Things were rolling. Like, we were making money. And then our teachers would now take us to the office and say, we're going to exclude you. We're going to do this and da-da-da-da. But you, and I'm directing this to you, Lynette, what do you think like teachers should think about this kind of thing? Because it's a money-making business, and we're actually doing entrepreneurship in school, but they're demonizing it because they're saying that we can't sell in school. But we're providing a better product than what you're providing for us in school in terms of our eating and so on. So I don't know. What would you say to that as like to encourage the entrepreneurship? Maybe not in school setting or whatever, but like set up a little market outside school, like to, I don't know, like boost it in terms of,
what you were passionate about and what you had the potential for. So that is an example of adultification. And then the second thing I'd say is, I don't know his name, but in 2015, so that's quite a while ago, there was a case of another student who was selling sweets in his school toilets. He was a young mixed heritage man, and he got to the point of getting press coverage. He ended up getting investment from one of the dragons, you know, from Dragon's Den, one of those dragons, and they invested in him, and it went really successfully for him. So it's about, exactly like I said, could you do something outside of school hours? Yeah. Could you dedicate a day a month where students get to do a little pop-up? Because we did that in university. We did a pop-up for students, because a lot of our students, because obviously I taught business, so they all had kind of bit entrepreneurial ideas, and we would do a pop-up where they could kind of bring their business ideas and sell, whether it's their t-shirts or their services, they could sell that there. So I think it's for the teachers to think, how can we channel this potential and this interest that they have? Because 9 times out of 10, they don't have that interest in any other thing from years 9 to 11. So I think it's such a disadvantage to them when that isn't harnessed and when that isn't kind of cultivated. So again, it's about who's teaching you, who are those teachers, and how are they being trained? Because if they're being trained in a way that's telling them that, yeah, you're right to criminalise this behaviour and put them on internal or external exclusion, then it's fine what they're doing. But if you're training them to think, okay, identify when students have potential and when they're passionate about something and try and channel that into something, then there'll be a multitude of services, things like LMU, like we literally focus on employability and entrepreneurship, so they could bring organisations like ours in to aid those and facilitate those pop-ups. So it's really about that teacher and those teachers. First of all, what are their attitudes and are they adultifying young people? And secondly, what resources in terms of the organisations that you're bringing in do they have to provide those students with alternatives? Because I get that it's against policy, to school policy, to sell in the playground, but I don't think that it should just be an open and shut case of, okay, you've done this one thing, we're going to exclude you. I think that was such, for my peers and for you, and even for anybody else that's done it, I know my sister did it, my brother did it, that is such a loss when you don't harness that potential and cultivate it, because then people will, like the drug dealers in my community, people will, there will be other people who will harness that potential, so it's about those teachers,
okay,
it's not about you.
We've got 6 more minutes, so don't want to rush it, but we want to take as many questions as possible.
Mine wasn't a question, it was more of a continuation. So.
Okay. Yes. Well, Josh, and then I'll go to you, yeah? Is that okay? Okay, Josh. Yes, please.
Okay, so great conversation, Liz. Thank you for that. Liz, I have a question for you. So you talked about early development quite a lot, especially for young black kids, which is important. It got me to thinking about more education in terms of primary school and secondary school. If we look at the Jewish community down the road, for example, North London, they're not ashamed to put their community through nursery or into secondary school or university. So how do you think we can do that in that community now? Because I think it's a struggle really from secondary school to primary school. How do we figure that out as a community? I know it's a tough question, but I'm just wondering your thoughts on it.
I think there has to be, I think part of the reason I didn't really go in, but part of the reason why I did this is because I'd seen my mother do it. And I think there's something about seeing things in action.
Yep.
So when I'm saying to you, my mother bought the nursery that I used to attend when I was 4, 5. She bought that nursery with money that she got from my dad, from my granddad, bit of investment from the bank, bought that business and decided this is what she was going to do. Whether I knew it or whether I didn't consciously at that time, it was showing me a model of, oh, okay, this is how you do it. And then adopting that model to suit a kind of community perspective that I had as a young person growing up and looking at what black community means to me, because also this term black community means different things to different people. And I think, again, that's why I talk so carefully about nuance in these conversations, that we are not homogenous. We all have our own perception of what education is. We all have our own perception about what education looks like and what it feels like. But I think we have to think about who can we band together with who has a shared vision of that. Because within the black communities, we've got a Pan-African community, we've got an African community, we've got a Jamaican community, we've got a Bayesian community. There's so many different communities, and I talk about the Pan-African movement specifically and particularly because of my own lived experience of understanding what Pan-Africanism meant growing up. Not that I was a part of a Pan-African community, but I saw how Pan-Africanism really dominated a lot of the conversation, particularly if we're thinking about Garveyism, as somebody who is of Jamaican heritage. Now, I knew what community meant to me as somebody who, my parents insisted that we would go back and forth from Jamaica from 1990. We just had to, 6 weeks holiday. We're a lot of going yards, like we're all going Jamaica, that's just what we're doing. And we're not going to stop in the 5-star hotel, we're going to stop in bush, right? And you understand when you go into the bush, this is what community is. We're all together, we're learning how to wash ourselves, we're learning how to make sure that we're managing our diet, we're learning how to speak to our grandparents, we're understanding manners and respect. That doesn't translate in the UK, it means a different thing. Now, even within that, when we're thinking about banding together with the community, when I went to university, me being of Jamaican heritage was like, oh, you're a Jamo. It means something different now because it's a different black community. So this black community is rooted in West Africa. I haven't got a clue about West Africa because my parents are Jamaican. And so when I'm talking about having the conversation, what you're asking is a big question and there is no succinct answer. I'm saying you have to find like-minded people. And with those like-minded people, you move towards attaching yourself to another like-minded group. We think about racialised identity. Yes, that's important, but culture, the way that you do things, is even more integral to this.
Good. Thanks, George. Okay. Any more questions? Oh, yes.
It's mainly a question for Sam, but also the panel. With hindsight, and it's a double-edged sword, but how do you think the educational system and also our own communities, because there's stigmas around ADHD and everything in both spectrums basically, how do you think everybody could have helped facilitate your early learning and development and everything throughout your life had everybody known beforehand?
I think I'll keep it brief so you can hear from the rest of the panel, but I think what Liz said earlier about in terms of conversations, so being from Nigeria, right, like I don't talk to my parents like that, if I'm being honest. And asking questions is not necessarily something that was encouraged, or even understanding my behavior traits wasn't necessarily something that maybe they were looking at. For them, it was like, read your books, you're going to school, we came from Nigeria, you have no option. I don't care about what you're going through, read your books. But actually, I guess a level of understanding and grace and actually seeing that this young person or this child is going to become an adult one day. What is the foundations I'm building for them, and what life do I want them to have, like in terms of confidence, being able to challenge, being able to see themselves as they should see themselves, not as less than, not as broken in any sense of the word, but actually you're a powerful young boy who's going to become a young man who's going to lead a family. You need to be able to understand yourself, and one day you're going to have those conversations with another little boy. And if you don't learn that from a young age, how then the cycle just repeats, right? So yeah, I think understanding, grace and empathy basically.
That was a really good answer. Yeah, so we've got one more. Okay, Ivan's right there. That's my twin, by the way, guys. Yeah, thank you.
For a question for Lynette. So, what impacts have you seen from sitting on the school governing board, those organisations? What kind of, I guess, what have you seen of the positives and the negatives from it so far?
I think it's actually taught me that, again, it's about skin folk and being good folk. Our head teacher is a black woman. She's incredible, but I think being a head teacher, I think like being a CEO, you don't have as much power when it comes to your board as you do with like your workforce, and I've learnt that. And then our board is quite diverse, but I think when we raise the challenging questions, I think it's me and one other person that raise the challenging questions, you get the responses like, it's not our responsibility, it's not our duty. So it's not, I don't think the impact that I've gone in wanting to have is as easy to achieve. So I understand that it's going to be a longer journey. I saw an article today about adultification of youth, black youth in particular. So that's something that I forwarded to kind of back up the conversation that I told you guys that I had earlier this week with the safeguarding lead. But in terms of the impact, I wouldn't say that the impact that I want to have has happened yet, or is even on the, I think this anti-racism game is such a long game and such a big struggle, and everyone's going to be against you, and it's not going to be rewarding, and it's going to be very burdensome. And I just kind of... And
also nothing's going to happen in our lifetime.
Because
white people still don't understand racism.
Yeah, exactly. You're literally just planting seeds. Because once somebody says that and you see the nods, you see that, okay, these are individual conversations I'm going to have to make you understand why this is the wrong mindset to have. And these are articles that I'm going to have to forward. But if you're having to prove that these are conversations that have to be had, and you're having to prove that kids who are taking drugs and alcohol, you should be having discussions about them, about who's introducing drugs and alcohol, then you know already, like you said, it's not happening in our lifetimes. This is a long game.
But if that was, and if that was the case, you know, the legacy of the work of Marcus Garvey, of Malcolm X, would be lived here now.
It would be happening.
It's not,
it's
because
not
the institution of and the systems of are bigger than us.
And also, it's who's sponsoring it as well. So the work that I did in Mayor, we spoke to another school who's based in Lewisham, one of the Hatcham Academies, I called them out because I think it's important too. And they are named after somebody who was a beneficiary of slavery. So they were funding it and they owned a slave farm. I don't like that term, but that's what they've called it. And everything they built, Hatcham Academy, and the schools that they built here are all kind of a benefit, or an outcome of them owning plantations. And the school kind of did work to kind of publicise this and try and get his statue taken down because it's in the playground, and try and change their name. But then who owns the school? It's the people with the money, right? So the parents who are donating because they have that kind of money in their account, and it's the people, it's a privatised school, it's an academy. So the people who have the money to fund the school, they don't want it changed, so that change isn't happening.
But the conversation is about our financial and economic position within this country, you know, and that's what I'm saying. Before we even get into that, we have to understand and know what is the community, what is this black community. We have to be able, and part of the tool, you know, of racism is just constant distraction.
It is.
That's all that it is. It's just constant distraction.
It's also what you guys were both saying as well. Like, it is lifetime work, and it's less about, because it's easy to, like, especially in the spaces that we are, there's you find few and far in between. So when you do see something that looks like you tend to latch onto that. Well, I used to. I've stopped doing that because of what you said. Like, you realise that, again, everybody is different, and just because somebody's black, it doesn't mean that you have the shared ideals of how things should be.
Just because somebody's doing anti-racism work, it doesn't mean
that. So often you find yourself doing the work alone in your respective field, but I think it is work for a particular type of person as well, because it's not back after not back after not back, and sometimes you're creating that little bit of change. But for me, I went through a stage of feeling really upset by it because I felt I was helping these black people get these jobs, but to be thrown in such a toxic environment. So it kind of was just like, what am I really doing? Because, you know, we're still in, the environment is still the environment, right? But I think that little by little by little by little by little, the change something will happen. I guess it's just
so in that academy, they've been able to oust the head teacher who was on the side of the donors. So that's their reward, and I think in their lifetime that will probably be the only reward. But they know that they've made that little impact, and they're still making noise. So although we probably won't see a lot of impact coming, that little thing has happened, and like you said, little by little by little, at some point something will have to change.
You just have to keep the fight.
I mean, I would like to end on that high note, but I don't think
Liz is like,
sorry. I think there's an element of, you have to have hope, but we have to be realistic with what it is that we're doing. This movement has come from generations of people from before us, and you know this. So,
our time it was worse.
Exactly.
A lot worse.
But I think the structures and the powers that be are becoming more sophisticated in how they're challenging the work that we're doing now. That is what we need to be really aware of. That and that financial and structural, economic and political power we do not have.
This is it. That's what we need to work.
I grew up in Brent, and my MP is Dawn Butler, black woman. growing up in Brent is a different experience to a lot of my friends who grew up in like East London or other parts of London. Our schools were black and Asian, our head teachers are black and Asian, our sub-head teachers are black. It was just black. I didn't go to a white school. There was like 3 white people in my year. And I didn't really have to deal with white people, I guess, until I got to college.
But we see what's happened to Dawn Butler, even in terms of her personal health. The cost to that for black women is that the brunt of that is that we're carrying it. And I'm saying there should be more Dawn Butlers, of course. That should have inspired us all. But because we see the way in which misogynoir works, we see the way in which our health comes and pays the cost for that, we are fearful about stepping into political arenas.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't worry, we will have time to network and so on and ask more questions, but for now we're going to wrap it up. Just please bring a really big round of applause for both Liz and
Love you guys.
I'm just going to say that they're just going to plug their social medias and their businesses. So Liz?
You should all be following me. At the Black Nursery Manager on Instagram, that's the platform that I use the most. Please engage with me, please follow me, please talk to the white people in the comments because I haven't got time. Please make sure that you continue to amplify the work that I'm doing in the early years because I can only do it if other black people are doing this alongside me.
Thank you so much, Lynette.
At Elimu Community, so Elimu is ELIMU. I'm writing it like English. Okay, no, it's not that. Elimu Community, so ELIMU Community, and then my personal one is _Nabasa, but I'm not really good on there, so Elimu Community is a really good one to engage with. I literally did my first post in 2022 today, this week.
That's her. And then for me, obviously follow Out the Box because we do this together. But in terms of my personal, it would be the Future is Black podcast where I interview it's like this, very much like this, but I talk to people who are predominantly in employment and have done quite well for themselves and are sharing a lot of their expertise, a lot of their experiences, but also a lot of gems on how to move forward in your career mostly. But we also touch on other subjects as well. There ain't no conversations around who's paying for the first day and that foolishness. It's very much so things to advance. I'm against those conversations. Okay, Ren.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. I just want to say a big thank you to the London Interdisciplinary School for having us here to have this conversation. This is the beginning of something bigger, so I'm very grateful for their participation. Thank you Lynette, thank you Liz, thank you Ivy as
thank
always
you, Ren.
for carrying this with me and without the box. Please fill out the feedback form. If you scan the QR code, it will take you straight to the Google form. We really need your feedback because we need to keep having these conversations, but we need to know that it's beneficial to you once you leave, not just here. And yeah, follow us at Out the Box UK. We do have another event coming up in the summer and then again in October, but we will be doing things within certain spaces and organisations. So if you work anywhere and you feel like you want to have something like this taking place there, or if you feel like we need to come in and do some training or anything like that, please speak to your workplace and then just